This is Land of Havilah, Psalm 102. This psalm is a telling of the miseries of this world and our desperation in it. At least at times we're miserable and desperate in this world. We all know that, but it turns out the only reason to mention it is that all these miserable conditions will be reversed. This psalm winds up being a sweeping prophecy of how God will eventually put all misery in the past for us, establish His kingdom in Zion, appear there in His glory, gather His people there, cause all the nations of the earth to serve Him, and eventually how the heavens and earth will perish and be changed out like changing clothes, for a new heaven and earth, as this psalm teaches, and as the New Testament teaches, and in this psalm how God's servants will continue there. Through all of it, God was the same from start to finish. Coming first in verses 1 to 11, the part about life in the world as it is now being almost intolerable. In verse 1, as we'll read, we're afflicted, overwhelmed, and pour out our complaints to God. We want a quick answer in verse 2. We feel burned out and consumed in verse 3, quote, "For my days consume away like smoke. My bones are burned as a torch," end quote. In verse 4, at times we're so heartsick we're too distressed to eat, quote, "My heart is blighted like grass, for I forget to eat my bread," end quote. In verse 5, we groan, and our bones stick to our skin. There's not a sense of fatness and fullness of life. In verses 6 and 7, even with 8 billion people on this planet, we still feel isolated at times, like a pelican in the wilderness, a lone sparrow on a housetop, or an owl in a barren land. In verse 8, my enemies reproach me all day long, meaning our fellow men insult us, disrespect us, and otherwise weigh us down and make life difficult. In verse 11, in old age we waste away, quote, "My days are like a long shadow, I've withered like grass." Again, the only reason to mention any of it is that God's going to fix it. When He mentions it, it's a sign He'll fix it. Now, reading that section about the miseries of the current era, starting in verse 1, a prayer of the afflicted when he's overwhelmed and pours out his complaint before Yahweh. "Hear my prayer, Yahweh. Let my cry come to you. Don't hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Turn your ear to me. Answer me quickly in the day when I call. For my days consume away like smoke. My bones are burned as a torch. My heart is blighted like grass and withered, for I forget to eat my bread. By reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones stick to my skin. I'm like a pelican of the wilderness. I have become as an owl of the waste places. I watch and have become like a sparrow that is alone on the housetop. My enemies reproach me all day long. Those who are mad at me use my name as a curse, for I've eaten ashes like bread and mixed my drink with tears, because of your indignation and your wrath, for you've taken me up and thrown me away. My days are like a long shadow. I've withered like grass." Comment, that was a description of life in the present, the way the world is now. It's distressing. Ever since Genesis 3:19, when Adam and Eve sinned, the world has had thorns and thistles. We get our food by the sweat of our brow. We're made from dust, and to dust we shall return. And there are all the miserable things we just read in verses 1 to 11. It is that bad at times. It's also very difficult and objectionable. But coming up, here's how God's going to reverse all of it in the second section of the psalm, which is verses 12 to 22. There's just as much about the reversal as there was about the original condition. In verse 12, God will have mercy on Zion, meaning on the people who belong to Him. He sees their miserable condition, and just like He heard the groaning of the children of Israel in Egypt, Exodus 2:24, He hears our groaning in this fallen world. Let's not think He let the world fall in Genesis chapter 3, threw up His hands and declared Himself unable to fix it. He didn't say it sounded like a good idea at the time to create the world, but Satan messed the world up and now I can't fix it. He says in the next verse of the psalm, He'll have mercy on Zion, which means He'll fix the problems He just mentioned. Not that He'll have mercy on the entire world, He'll have mercy on those who are His own. In verse 13, "For it's the time to have pity on her. Yes, the set time has come," end quote. God has set a time that He'll take pity and fix those problems. The time has come as of verse 13. So starting in the next verse, we're living it up in the prophetic future. In verse 14, speaking of Zion, quote, "For your servants take pleasure in her stones and have pity on her dust," end quote. When we get to that place when God declares an end to this age and the beginning of the age of Zion, we'll kiss the ground of it, so to speak. Even the stones and dust of it will be beautiful to us. The misery is behind us. And in verse 15, speaking of the world at that time, the nations will fear Yahweh's name. All the kings of the earth will fear His glory. The descendant of David, the Messiah, will be king on the earth in Zion, with all the other kings of the earth serving Him. In verse 16, quote, "He has appeared in glory," end quote. When Jesus returns to take the scepter of the world, He'll return in power and glory. From Matthew 25:31, quote, "But when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the holy angels with Him, then He'll sit on the throne of His glory," end quote. He will have appeared in glory, as the psalm says. In verse 17, He has responded to the prayer of the destitute and has not despised their prayer, end quote, meaning He'll fix it in response to the prayers of the afflicted. In verse 18, quote, "This will be written for the generation to come. A people which will be created will praise Yah." Yah is a shortened form of Yahweh. A people yet to be created, which includes you and me and everyone in the modern era. We weren't created yet when this psalm was written. We're fulfilling this prophecy now by praising Yah. In verses 19 to 22, God looked down from the height of His sanctuary during those miserable times, saw the earth, heard the groans of the prisoner, meaning of all of us who are imprisoned here on this fallen planet. We were condemned to die, but since He's looking down in mercy, He'll free us from death, that we may declare Yahweh's name in Zion, meaning He'll raise us from the dead so that we'll declare His name in that coming holy city of Zion. We'll declare His praise in Jerusalem, which is New Jerusalem. Not that Zion and New Jerusalem are the same. It seems Zion will be first for a millennium, then it'll be the New Jerusalem that descends from heaven to the new earth. We'll dwell there with God for eternity. Verse 21 mentions them both. In verse 22, it'll be a situation where, quote, "The peoples are gathered together, the kingdoms, to serve Yahweh," end quote. People from all over the earth will be recruited there to serve God. This is you and me. We'll be loving even the dust of that place, thankful that we've put off the miseries of the fallen world. Now, reading this section about God's kingdom on earth in Zion and the New Jerusalem that we just explained, verse 12, "But you, Yahweh, will remain forever. Your renown endures to all generations. You will arise and have mercy on Zion, for it's time to have pity on her. Yes, the set time has come. For your servants take pleasure in her stones and have pity on her dust. So the nations will fear Yahweh's name, all the kings of the earth your glory. For Yahweh has built up Zion. He has appeared in His glory. He has responded to the prayer of the destitute and has not despised their prayer. This will be written for the generation to come. A people which will be created will praise Yah, for He has looked down from the height of His sanctuary. From heaven Yahweh saw the earth, to hear the groans of the prisoner, to free those who are condemned to death, that men may declare Yahweh's name in Zion and His praise in Jerusalem, when the peoples are gathered together, the kingdoms, to serve Yahweh." Comment, that was a description of how God's going to fix it all, including two different prophetic epochs of time. Now coming in the third and final section of the psalm, verses 23 to 28, it's a prayer in the present time that David prayed and that we can pray as well, expressing our faith that God will make it all come to pass. In verse 23 of it, quote, "He weakened my strength along the course. He shortened my days," end quote. That's a summary of the current life. Life's tough, then you die. But our prayer in the next verse is, quote, "My God, don't take me away in the middle of my days," end quote. You and I should be aware that the time of our death isn't our end or our beginning. Death's somewhere sandwiched in the middle for us, because life for the believer goes on. Jesus said, "If a man keeps my word, he'll never taste of death," John 8:52. So what we ordinarily call death is really somewhere sandwiched in the middle for us. He won't take us away in the middle of our days in answer to that prayer. In fact, He won't take us away at all. We'll be alive with Him. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, 2 Corinthians 5:8. Then in verses 25 to 27 in the last section, God was in the beginning, He laid the foundation of the earth, and through all the ages, and there will be specific ages very distinct from one another, He'll remain the same as He was in the beginning. In verses 25 and 26, the earth and heavens as we now know them will perish. They'll wear out like a garment. And sticking with the clothing metaphor in verse 26, God will change them like a garment. He'll destroy the old heavens and earth and create new ones, 2 Peter 3:7 and 13, and Revelation 21:1. In the final verse of the psalm, the children of God's servants, which is you and I if we serve Him, will continue into the coming ages, will be established in the coming ages. Now that section, verse 23, He weakened my strength along the course. He shortened my days. I said, My God, don't take me away in the middle of my days. Your years are throughout all generations. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth. The heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, all of them will wear out like a garment. You'll change them like a cloak, and they will be changed. But you are the same. Your years will have no end. The children of your servants will continue. Their offspring will be established before you. Psalm 103 is next.